thank you all so much for joining us for this VC Lab webinar. If this is your first webinar that you've done with us, please subscribe. We do these webinars every single week, and the goal is to try to educate the market, people about venture capital, and just things that are happening in the venture capital world in general. We try to make these webinars as interactive as we possibly can. And so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, say hello. Also, if you have questions for the panel, which I will introduce here shortly, make sure that you add it to the Q&A, which is a button at the bottom of your screen, and you can also upvote and things like that. So that's what we're trying to do here, just to make this as interactive as possible. If this is, again, your first time here, VC Lab is an accelerator for venture capitalists, is the leading accelerator for venture capitalists. We have helped launch over 200 venture capital firms to date. We are currently, on cohort 10, and we're going over to cohort 11 now. And so, most new managers at this point in time are kind of working through the program, and we've learned a lot in this process. So if you have obviously questions about that, I'm happy to kind of answer that. But, without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. There is one thing that I generally like to do just to make sure that, we kind of cover all of our bases here. I'm going to read a quick disclaimer, and then I'm going to introduce everybody here. So just so everybody knows, the content presented today is not directed to any investors or potential investors and does not constitute an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy any securities. Okay. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the following three VC Lab alumni. So Melissa, maybe we can start with you. Would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm from Capital M. I'm also part of, or was, and I still feel like I'm a part of VC Lab, the cohort 4, and that was back in 2021. I'm thrilled to be here. I can't wait to share what I've learned with everybody, and I can't wait for your questions.
Amazing, amazing. Alex, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Yes, I'm Alex Gálvez. I'm managing partner of 99 Startups. I think I was part of cohort 6 or 7, and we're a firm that invests in pre-seed and seed in Latin America, and I'm really happy to be here.
Super excited to learn from you today as well, Alex. Pankaj?
Hey everyone, thanks Mike. I'm Pankaj Jain. I'm the managing partner of Saka Ventures. I spent about a decade in the hedge fund world, mostly in technology operations. In 2007, I moved to India to do a startup in the domestic services space, and that kind of led me to fall into venture accidentally.
Amazing, amazing. And for everybody that's just joined, we try to make these, as interactive as possible. So if you have questions for the panel, just add them into the Q&A. There's a button at the bottom of the screen, and I'll make sure to kind of relay them over. So maybe I can get started. I've got lots of questions, obviously, for the panel, but maybe we can just start with you, Pankaj. What inspired you to launch a venture capital firm?
Yeah, so I had been a VC for a couple of years before in India specifically, and I got to work with some amazing founders over the years as an investor and as a mentor, and did a couple of startups myself. Unfortunately, they all failed. But it's really the founders that inspired me to start this fund and this firm. It was a couple of founders that I've been working with for a number of years came to me multiple times and really just asked me to institutionalize the work I was doing with them. And part of that was the investment part of that was just bringing more of my resources to work with them and help them in terms of product, pricing strategy, customer discovery, intros to other investors, and having a more institutional infrastructure around that could have been more impactful for them. So one founder over dinner told me that there was a lot of really awful investors out there that they had come across. And, I still had enough goodwill amongst founders to get access to the deals that I wanted to get into. So I should do it. And after hearing similar suggestions, I started considering it. And around that same time, I saw a tweet from VC Lab, and I was like, oh, what is this? And I didn't really know what VC Lab was at the time. But I put in an application, and luckily I was accepted into cohort 5, and here we are.
How about you, Alex? What inspired you to launch a firm?
Yeah, I started angel investing some years ago, and then I saw the impact that technology startups have on society. I saw like many companies like Nowports, Clara, and many others like really solving problems for the region and producing a lot of high quality jobs. And yeah, I was just as an angel investor, and then I saw that I was limited because I was just one person, and I could have a lot more impact by building a team and building an enduring venture capital firm. So there are not so many great investors in the seed stage in Latin America. So I saw this need. So I just started angel investing, and also I think it was best for founders and also for investors, because there was a lot of people that wanted to invest but didn't have access to great startups. So it's just a way to have a lot more impact and to really build an enduring venture capital firm for the next 100 years in Latin America.
Super inspiring. How about you, Melissa?
Yeah, both Pankaj and Alejandro completely resonate with you on this one. So what happened was, I worked in tech and advertising, sales, and marketing for amount of time, worked for the big firms. And then I did a 180 to wealth management for 5.5 years. And then I decided to combine those two skill sets, like money stewardship and tech, with venture capital. I'm not a programmer, but what I do know is money management, money stewardship, investor relations. And so I thought, what better way to leverage like my skill sets and what I'm passionate about to, again, be able to support the next generation of companies that are going to have a real impact on this world, and also to ensure that these companies and these founders are reflective of the amazing diverse population of Canada and our major cities.
Yeah, just agree. Super inspiring. Maybe we can double click on that. You just talked about, Latin America, Alex. Maybe we can start with you on this one. So what opportunities are you really like excited about, especially right now in 2023?
Yeah, the thing about markets like Latin America, Africa, and maybe some parts of Asia is that there's still a lot of inclusion to be built. Like if you build a great startup in Europe or in the US, maybe you are like fixing a small problem for a small subset of people. Like in Latin America, there are still a lot of chances in infrastructure, in healthcare, in fintech. So if you build something really great, like you can have an impact on 80 or 90% of the population. Like the thing I like about Latin America is that we're still building the infrastructure needed for other startups in the future. So if you invest in the infrastructure layer, probably it's gonna be a really big company if it succeeds.
Melissa, you talked about like a little bit more on like in Canada and diversity and things like that. What are you like super excited about here in 2023?
For sure. I think it's two things, and they really feed off of each other. So the first thing is the fact that Canada relies a lot on new Canadians, international students who eventually become permanent residents and citizens. I think last year we welcomed almost 500,000 new Canadians, and the trend's only going upward. And I think within 10 years, Statistics Canada said that Canada's population is going to be 30% visible minority. And now the new Canadians that we're having coming into the country are very, very, very ambitious, educated, hungry, and they are starting to build these incredible startups now. And so what I see, number one, is like all this like importing of talent just within our own population, and new talent that's coming in that are building awesome startups that again, like what was mentioned by Alejandro, solving like big problems. There's that. And then specifically in 2023, with the current climate that we're in right now, What I'm seeing and what is an opportunity is the ability now to have deeper, richer, longer conversations with founders to really get to know them. I mean, over a year ago, I'll say like 15 months ago, or maybe even like a year ago, there was more FOMO in the market. Deals were happening more quickly, but now we really get to take the time to know and work with the founders. And I think that is an incredible opportunity for both VCs and founders, on top of, getting down to the nuts and bolts, the unit economics, and really helping them build these enduring sustainable business plans.
Agree 100%. How about you, Pankaj? What are you the most excited about in 2023?
Yeah, so I'm excited about a couple of things. B2B, SaaS, cybersecurity, fintech, all areas, crypto, that have been beaten down a lot over the last year. I think areas that have been beaten down, there's a lot of new founders that are coming into those areas. And some of the traits that I've been seeing amongst these founders is, they have experience in these industries. They understand and are committed to working in these industries. And they have more realistic expectations about, valuations, and also how long it's going to take to build an enduring business. And I think some of these industries that have really suffered during, especially the last month, banking specifically, I think there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of B2B fintech types of businesses. The other thing that is really, and it has been interesting and exciting to me over the last 15 years, is what's going on in India. There's just so much happening there. A lot of people don't realize this, but over 100 million people were taken above the poverty line in the last 6 years. Just let that sink in for a second. 100 million people, which is a third of the population of the United States, was taken out of poverty in 6 years. And we had a pandemic in the middle of that, right? So if you look at what's going on, the needs of people and large amounts of people are increasing. So, whether it's education, it's healthcare, there's so many different things that I think are really going to get exciting, even more exciting in India. But these are all industries that have also been beaten down over the last year after the 2021 insanity. So there's a lot of really good opportunities to get invested in right now.
There's actually a really interesting question here in the Q&A that I just thought, that since you just talked about this, Alex, as well as Pankaj, can you, just wanted to double click on that. Both of you have obviously an affinity for emerging markets. You talked about 100 million people. Alex, you talked about like a lot of the infrastructure being built. Is there like specific areas within these markets? And maybe Alex, we could start with you, and then Pankaj, maybe we go with you next. It's like that there are specific opportunities that are really interesting, like right now in, say, LATAM, and maybe Pankaj, after this, maybe you can talk a little bit more about India.
Yeah, sure. Especially in Latin America, there are a lot of companies that have operations in 3 or 4 countries, and those operations are really difficult. There's a big opportunity for fintech, for B2B SaaS, for international transfers, FX between companies. All that are problems that right now are really manually solved, and there's a big opportunity there for companies that want to integrate Latin America as a whole. Also, like in the infrastructure of shipping, of packages, taxes, all that is really manual, and there are a lot of new companies automating this with software. So I like to see like the integration of Latin America as a whole. That's a big opportunity. And also in Brazil and other places, cashless payments are growing really, really fast. And that's going to be also a big opportunity in the region in Latin America.
Pankaj, any thoughts on things that are super interesting right now in India in particular?
Yeah. So India has built, and some of it was government funded and government agencies, called the India Stack. And what they have done is try to build rails for payments, for logistics, for e-commerce, all identity, a whole bunch of different things. And, it has really helped with onboarding a lot of the unbanked and the bottom of the pyramid. I think what is really starting to emerge now, and what is going to be really interesting, is how a lot of that India stack is going to be exported to the rest of the world, right? Not to the US, not to Western Europe, but more to Africa, Southeast Asia, the rest of South Asia, and other parts of the world where demographics are more similar to India than the US. So we're starting to see a lot of companies starting to do some really interesting things. We're taking parts of that stack, or taking the stack itself and just saying, hey, here's a whole countrywide solution. And the interesting thing is that the Indian government is also doing that. They're working towards taking everything that they've subsidized and built over the last couple of years, including UID and the payment systems and all that, and moving it to other parts of the world, right? Like Eastern Europe and all. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity for Indian companies that are going out of India and targeting international markets. So these are other markets. Latin America is another big opportunity, I think, for this type of stack. So that whole thing is really interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And for everybody here, you know, we're doing this for you. So if you have questions, add them into the Q&A. There's a button at the bottom of your screen, Q&A. You can touch that and just go ahead and add a question. Also, you can upload questions that you find really interesting, and I'm going to go ahead and send them over to the panel. But you know, before we do that, I do have a couple more questions here. So Melissa, you know, you've been at this for a little bit as well. You know, what would you say has been kind of like the hardest challenge for you to navigate from like launching your firm, and like how did you overcome this?
For sure. Honestly, I would say it's all like it's the mental game that you play, right? And part of that too is having the mental endurance to keep going, both on like the fundraising side, but then also on the founder support side. Like, so for example, you know, the biggest piece of advice I have for fundraising is to do not, under any circumstances, take your foot off of that pedal. Like, not even for a couple of weeks, not even for a month. Like, always keep, like, while you're in your fundraising period, until you've done your full close, or as close as you can get, continue to book those investor calls weekly. Do not stop, do not take a break. Slow down if you need to, but do not stop, because, you know, with myself, I noticed that I kind of slowed down in December, and then to get back into it, I did, but it was more challenging. And then I was also talking to other emerging fund managers, and they said that the minute that they felt like there was like a roadblock in the way. So for example, in VC Lab, I was talking to an emerging fund manager who had some soft commitments from family offices lined up. A bunch of those, you know, got spooked by the markets and pulled back. And so this emerging fund manager did not keep going. They kind of got discouraged. And then I asked them, like, what happened? When I saw them, like, what happened? And then they said, I lost momentum and I just can't get it back. And now I'm in my full-time job. And so it's on hold indefinitely. And so the biggest piece of advice is do not take your foot off the brake. The fundraising period is typically 1.5 years, 2 years total. Keep going, slow down if you need to, but don't stop.
How about you, Pankaj? What has been kind of like the hardest challenge for you to navigate so far?
Yeah, you know, I completely agree with everything that Melissa said. You take your foot off that pedal for a second and everything really comes to a standstill. And, you know, with the market conditions, the way that they've been over the last year, up, down, which way are we going? I think that's created a lot of confusion for a lot of high net worth individuals and family offices. And, you know, if you combine that with not constantly being in front of them and building that trust, it really just kind of puts a huge damper on your fundraising process. It is a marathon. You really got to focus on it for the long haul and really pace yourself properly to do it. And, you know, the other thing that I think was one of the biggest challenges was getting outside of my personal network, you know, expanding that network into new networks that I didn't have any connection to before, finding ways to get in there, and doing things that really don't scale necessarily, right? Doing events, right? You start doing events for people, bring people in that are part of your network, get them to bring other people in so that you can tap into other places that you didn't know even existed necessarily. So, those are some things that I found really difficult to do, and you really need to think through it. And if you are a solo GP, having a community like VC Lab is really helpful in kind of bouncing ideas around and taking those things forward.
How about you, Alex?
Yeah, I agree with what Melissa was saying. Like, don't lose momentum, and don't take your foot off the gas pedal, especially when you're fundraising. And you really have to start with your network, people that you know. But then you need to find people outside your network. And probably for Fund One, the institutionals are not going to invest, but you still gotta start building those relationships. It's important to at least talk to 1 or 2 institutionals a month to start building those relationships for Fund 2 or probably Fund 3. So it's really tired. I think it's a really mental game. And also, if you are already fundraising, you gotta close those LPs. Like, if you don't keep pushing, then you're gonna lose some of those commitments. So an LP is not closed until it's closed, and that's really, really difficult. And on the side of the portfolio management, like, if you help your companies, they are gonna introduce you to new possible LPs. So you can use the portfolio companies and work with them to help you look for new possible LPs.
There's a kind of an interesting question here from Pablo that's related to this, and I'm going to paraphrase the stuff for you, Pablo. But basically, like, he's asking, how did you manage kind of like the relationships with LPs, let's say before you did your close, and then maybe after you did your close? Melissa, maybe you can take this one, but if everybody else, feel free to jump in as you see fit as well.
I would love to hear from you, Pankaj and Alejandro. I'd love to. So I have a unique tactic, especially as somebody who, like, I have the financial management background, I have the tech background, but I'm a new emerging fund manager. So how do I use something, and I talk about this a lot, and I use what I call like the 6 touch point system. And so now I'm telling all of you, and that is, like, as you're developing the relationship, and I learned this when, I was also selling insurance door to door. And that is that before you do a life insurance sale, and if you can sell life insurance, you can raise money in a VC fund. But what I'd say, or what we learned, was that it takes at least 6 interactions before you actually sell somebody life insurance. And so I applied that same mentality just to really developing relationships with LPs and carrying down that funnel to close. And so a touch point could be, number one, is I always kept the newsletter, signing them up to your wider newsletter list, not your LP one, but like have a wider newsletter you send out. If you can't do monthly, try to do bi-monthly or quarterly, as much, like, whatever you have the bandwidth for. Another example, I have lots of crazy fun examples of how I got in front of, like, billionaires. One example, and this is where your community really helps you, and this is also where you have to do a little bit of time and maybe a little bit of money investment too, is that there's one amazing LP I have, and I met him at a pitch competition at a conference, and I wanted to find ways to keep in touch with them. So I would send him interesting articles or interesting startups in his area of expertise, and he really appreciated that. And then he actually asked me if I knew any more startups in that space, and so I sent him a whole, like, PDF report about it. Just for fun, on my own time, to show him I have the chops to source great companies. And then a friend of mine who was organizing this big gala knew that I was courting him as an LP, and told me, hey, he's going to be there, and I have a couple of extra tickets if you want to come. Now, it was in a city 5 hours away from Toronto, and I was at a conference even somewhere else, not in Toronto, but somewhere in that conference, I snuck away for about 12 hours and attended this gala where this LP was at, and I got to meet him, I got to meet his wife, and I got to meet a lot of amazing people. And I'm pretty sure that was, like, one of the keys that helped get that final meeting to close him. So the whole point of that is be really creative in finding different ways where you can interact with them at least 6 times, build that rapport. build that trust, show them what you can do for them, right? And then very important step is to book that actual pitch meeting after all of that so you can close them.
Anybody else have any thoughts here?
I'd love to hear.
I think Melissa hit all of the main points. For me, it was a little bit different. I started with a lot of folks that I knew personally and spent a lot of time educating them about venture and startups. Most of them did not have a background in the space. So it took a lot of work educating them. Some of them were excited about the opportunity and eventually came on board, but a lot of them who I assumed would do it because they are very, very wealthy, did not wind up doing it. And for various reasons. So I think, some of what you were saying applies also to folks that are already within your network, not just people outside of your network. Really spend the time to rekindle a lot of those relationships and build that trust early on. And maybe not approach them directly to pitch, but spend time with them and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? Let's spend some time. I want to get your thoughts. These are companies that I'm looking at right now. What do you think? And like really involve them in that process rather than just going straight out and pitching them. And I think that was some of the things that I learned along the way, that though these people are people I've known for decades, I shouldn't have gone out and pitched them directly right up front, right? I should have spent a little bit more time really building those relationships or rebuilding those relationships with them. So I think that's one thing that I learned out of the process.
Yes, and you need to think long term. Like not every LP is the right LP for your fund. You just got to build those relationships in the long run. And there are some investors that really like what you're doing, but maybe they're not the right fit for a fund one. But maybe they're a great LP for a fund two or a fund three. And you just gotta keep building those relationships over time.
Super interesting question here. This is really more for Alex and Pankaj here, but what can VCs in emerging markets like learn from mature markets like the United States? And do you think there's some relation or trend that follows from matured markets to emerging markets? Pankaj, maybe start with you on this. Oh, go Alex. Go Alex.
No, yeah, I think like markets are really similar, and also you can have two types of company in emerging markets: the ones that are building for the region, or the ones that are building globally. And those like have an advantage because you have a lot of great programmers, and salaries are a lot cheaper in Latin America than in the States. You're in the same time zone, so you can build a global product from Latin America or from India. And those, I think, the trends are the same as in global markets.
Yeah, there's a few things that I saw over my years of investing in India, which was early on, and I want to say this is like 2010, 2011, when the whole idea of building a startup started becoming a little bit more widely accepted in the country. There was a lot of Me Too companies, people who were building clones of successful US-based startups. And, I wrote a blog post years ago about how building Facebook for India is not interesting. And the whole idea was that just building things that are clones of what's going on in the US or in other developed markets isn't necessarily the right thing for an emerging market like India. And there were other real core problems that needed to be solved, and entrepreneurs could really step in and solve a lot of those problems. And, I think we've seen a lot of that over the last 10, 12 years. There's been a lot of entrepreneurs that have really jumped in to solve really core Indian problems. And what I was talking about before with like the India stack is, I think, the result of a lot of entrepreneurs going out and solving very Indian problems. And I think a lot of the problems that we saw coming out of India are also problems that occur in other emerging markets. So that to me is an opportunity where, all right, a large country like India with 1.4 billion people has gone out and solved a lot of these problems over the last 10, 12 years, built systems to handle it at a national level. And now these things can be taken out to other countries. So I see that as a really interesting opportunity. Of course, we're going to see opportunities where, there are folks who worked at Google and Microsoft and Goldman Sachs, leave those companies, go back to India and say, hey, I'm going to build a startup using relatively low cost talent and solve problems for the Western world. And I think we will continue to see some of those things. And that will work. We've seen a lot of companies do that over the years and successfully. But I think the really interesting stuff is the former, Indian problems and going out to other parts of the world and solving those.
There's a pretty interesting question here from David, and this is for everybody on the panel, just like some thoughts or some keys on how you think about identifying like the right companies that you may consider like engaging with for a potential investment at some point in the future. Any things you generally would like to share with the audience there?
Sure. For me, one of the things that I'd like to see is folks that I think I can build a long-term relationship with, and folks that truly they're ready to really commit to the next 10 years of their lives of building something. If I can see that, I'm willing to spend the time to kind of engage and potentially invest in the company in the future. But if I don't see that this is somebody that, I would not necessarily be friends with, but I would spend a lot of time with over the next 10, 12 years, if I don't see myself doing that, then that's probably not a business that I'm going to be excited about investing in. Because this is a long-term business, especially when you're investing at the pre-seed and seed stage. You are going to be spending the next 10 to 15 years talking to these people, working with them, and you really do need to invest in that relationship. And if the other person is not ready to invest in that relationship, it makes it very difficult. And for a lot of emerging managers, you are a small investor. You are not a large investor on the cap table. So it's really only your relationship that is going to help you when, a down round happens or another investor comes in and says, hey, you got to pay to play. How is the founder going to react to that? And will the founder stand up to you? It's really those relationships that you build early on that will help. So if I don't think that is going to happen, I'm probably not going to invest.
1,000% echo that. One of the biggest live learnings I've had with investing in startups is absolutely, it comes down to your relationship with the founder and also their relationship to their business, right? And again, what Pankaj said is are they in it for the long haul? Are they double down on it, right? And it's true. I've noticed this too as a smaller investor, emerging small fund. I find more often than not, the founder does have to speak up and go to bat and advocate and make space for you, because you might not have everything together. Your check might be smaller. And so having a founder that really believes in what you're doing just as much as what you believe in they're doing, like as long as you believe in each other, I think that's completely key. And I could say more on that, but I think we'll start there. Another really important aspect to add on to that too is also how is their relationship to their other investors? It's important, number one, that they have one, because it takes a village, and so there needs to be like investors that are also rallying around them and that really believe them as well. And so really take a look at that, what other investors are saying about them and how much they believe in the company as well.
Yes, for me, the founder is really important, but also the market there in which they're building. Like if it's a huge market with a lot of problems, or it's a growing market, that's really important as well. Maybe not so much what they're building right now, because that's going to change a lot if you're investing in seed and pre-seed. But like the market is an important starting point. And if they're in a market that it's not growing, or I'm not interested, then it doesn't make sense. Also for the founder, I like people that are in this for the long run. And sometimes I meet really intelligent founders, but they're like not building something that I'm interested in, but like maybe in their second or third company, if they're like really intelligent and really driven and really hardworking, maybe the first company is not the right one, but the second or third can be a really successful company. So I like to invest in people that are really good to work with. Although this company may not be the right one, if I really want to work with them, I invest in this company, having in mind the next or even the third company.
Interesting question from Gazais here. Any advice for reaching out to limited partners that are not in your direct network? Any advice there from the panel?
Well, with general solicitation, it's pretty hard to do so. So you really have to spend a lot of time starting with your existing network, whether it is folks that you've worked with, folks that you have gone to school with, whatever. Start with them and try to, get into other networks that they're a part of. The other thing that I think has worked well for a lot of people is, doing a newsletter that's very focused on a specific topic, talking about that newsletter, not talking about your fund or your firm, but talking about why that newsletter brings certain insights out that other people don't have. And, you can publicize that newsletter on LinkedIn and Twitter and everywhere else and get people to sign up for that. Some of those might turn into LPs at some point in the future, and you're establishing a relationship with them. The other thing that I think is very helpful is going to speak at events and also organizing your own events. So if you can get a speaking slot for a specific topic, fantastic. If you can't, start organizing your own events that are going to bring people in for a specific thing that is unique, right? And it might be related to your thesis, it might be related to your strategy, but starting that process and, it's a long process. It's a tough process. It's not like 1, 2, 3, we're done. It is something that might take years you're farming. You're not going out and hunting and eating what you killed this morning. You're farming for next season, right? So that's something to keep in mind.
I'd agree with that as well. And I probably speak on panels, both now in person and live, at least twice a month, maybe more. And then now people are coming up to me like, I think you should meet somebody, they invest and they're totally aligned, and it's super exciting. So newsletters, speaking, organizing events. And there's also the saying that we're always 6 degrees from being connected from somebody. So really, comb your existing network, because there's a really good chance that they are connected to somebody who's connected to somebody who you want to get in, who you would like to get into contact with. So there is that as well. And I mean, and a prime example of the fact that this is a long game is probably my second biggest LP. That was an introduction from their former business person who I knew because we used to, back 12 years ago, before they had this massive exit, I was part of a group of people in Toronto that did something called karaoke, we called it loser karaoke, but it was tech 20-something-year-old tech people who would all go to this one karaoke bar every Thursday and do karaoke. We were all in junior level positions, or we were just starting maybe our first, second startup. And so fast forward, and that kind of lasted for a couple of years, but then fast forward over 10 years, and somebody used to do karaoke there introduced me to one of my biggest LPs because that relationship was built. So it doesn't have to take that long, because of somebody that I met speaking and judging at an event, they also 6 months later committed to come on as an LP as well. But again, remember that exactly, it is farming. It is a long game. So really nurture and build that relationship.
Go Alex. I see.
And you just have to add a lot of value to portfolio companies, to other LPs, and probably they're not going to invest right now, but maybe in the future, just if they are interested in investing but want to invest directly, you can send them deal flow, you can send them other interesting stuff. So you just have to add a lot of value, and eventually that's going to pay off.
Any recommendations for, let's say, I do see that there's some GPs here in the audience, any recommendations for sharpening the investment thesis?
I think as you continue to invest, your thesis is going to evolve. And I think you have to spend time and really think about whether the thesis was right from the beginning. Even though some investors came on board and supported you with your initial thesis, I think as you see market conditions changing, as you see opportunities changing, your thesis has to evolve. It's an organic thing. It's not something that's set in stone necessarily. So I think it's important to have that conversation with your existing LPs also, and kind of talk about what you're seeing that might force a change or an evolution of that thesis. Some LPs may not like it. Some people might be perfectly fine with it, but I think it's something that you do need to spend time on and really incorporate into your fundraising process, as well as your existing relationships with your LPs. Having an LPAC helps with that as well.
Yeah, I think, the key there, as Pankaj said, is to understand and embrace the fact that your thesis is not this static thing. It is going to evolve and iterate and be refined all the time.
There's a
Yeah.
couple. Go, Alex. Sorry.
And the thesis is really similar to founder market fit. Like it has to be really unique to you and with your story. Why are you the right person for building this thesis? And also, as Melissa and Pankaj were saying, it's gonna evolve a lot. Maybe you start with a thesis, and then you see that you're leaving some important part of the investing on the side, or the climate is changing, and for example, AI right now, it's gonna change a lot of stuff. So if you were really adjacent to AI, now probably you have to invest in AI, generative AI as well. So it's not like solid on rock, it's changing all the time.
Well, and anybody can answer this, what advice would you give someone who's just starting out right now, getting into kind of the VC space? Melissa?
Yes, I might have said this in previous talks, but the best time to develop a relationship with potential LPs was a year ago, 2 years ago, and the next best time is today, is to start making those connections, establishing those relationships, not doing any asks right now, just adding values. Value could be just like an encouraging comment on their LinkedIn, or a thoughtful comment on their LinkedIn post. It could be sending them an article that they might find valuable. It could be making an introduction. It could be introducing them to founders in their space. But start building out your list of 200 to 500 potential LPs literally today.
Awesome. There's another question here from Christian that I thought was pretty good as well. Is like what are your thoughts on the impact of VC Lab in, like, let's say, your respective ecosystem? I know, Alex, you're a big ecosystem developer, so to speak. Do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yes, for me, it's been amazing. Like raising a fund, it's a really lonely job, same as a CEO from a startup. So you gotta find those networks of peers, of people that share same problems, where you can ask for solutions, or really just talk with somebody else to talk with peers. It's always important. I like to have 3 types of peers, like someone that's really similar to me, someone that's like 1 year or 2 years ahead, and someone that's like 8 years ahead. Because the fund that's maybe 8 to 10 years ahead, he's not gonna remember the problems that you're having right now. So you gotta have those 3 types of peers or mentors, so you can talk about problems and find a new solution for your problems.
Yeah, VC Lab is huge. I wouldn't have been able to do or accomplish what I've accomplished, like actually operationalize a fund, close rounds, invest in companies, if it weren't for, number one, is obviously the structure that Adeo and Mike have designed with VC Lab in order to be able to do that over the 16 weeks you're in the program. There's no way, there's just simply no way I would have been able to do it. That gave me the discipline and the structure to be able to create this thing from ground zero. And so number one is that structure. And then number two is like that community around you, like your whole world in building your fund is, you're part of this bigger VC Lab ecosystem. You're in smaller teams where you have weekly meetings, you encourage each other. And this journey is so unique and so tough. It's very few people who can understand it. And so to be, plopped right into an amazing community of others who are doing the same thing as you, it's priceless. And I still have catch-ups with people from my cohort. I still Slack them like all the time, like several times a week. So I would say structure, the program itself, and then that amazing community. And we even have now like Slack groups that are just like Toronto, VC Lab, fund managers, et cetera. It's great.
Thank you for the kind words, Melissa. Pankaj?
Yeah, look, I echo everything that Melissa and Alejandro said, but my perspective was a little bit different. I had been a VC for many years before. I took a break for a while, and I really didn't think I was going to start my own firm at any point, but VC Lab really kind of made that happen. VC Lab, with the structure, the planning and everything that you kind of go through, it made it so easy to just go through the process. And when I say so easy, that's relatively speaking, it's still really, really hard. But without those one-on-ones with you, Mike, and Adeo, and kind of going through a lot of the challenges with somebody who's been through the process, done it before, and can really kind of guide you in the right direction, or at some points just be the cheerleader that you need to say, hey, yeah, we can do this, we can keep going. VC Lab really helped with that. And then there's the community, and like Alejandro and Melissa were saying, there are people at all kinds of different stages of starting their fund and different stages of their careers, their lives, et cetera, and kind of bringing that in and really being able to form this community that can lean on each other and do deals together and share LPs together is a really, really rare thing. I don't think I've seen this in venture before, right? So what VC Lab has done, it really makes it much easier to figure out what starting a venture firm is like, what do you need to do, and what is the process, right? Like there's a lot of legal things that a lot of people are just never going to be aware of. And the fact that VC Lab makes it so simple for us to understand the legal structures, to understand why a certain legal structure makes sense, why your LPA is 36 pages instead of 250 pages, right? Like there's just so many components that we could spend another 2 hours just talking about why VC Lab and nothing else. So even for somebody who's been doing this in the past, I just found it so incredibly valuable, and I don't think I would have done it had I not come across VC Lab.
Thank you all for the kind words. I really, really appreciate it. Definitely made my day to hear this stuff. But speaking of legal, there is actually a highly upvoted question here, about like everybody here is investing in different countries, right? Like Canada, lots of countries in LATAM, India, and things like that. How do you think about navigating like the legal system? And does that affect kind of like your investment strategy?
I can go if Alejandro, please go ahead.
Yeah, for us, there are a lot of countries in Latin, but almost all the structures are either in Cayman or in the US. So if we see a company that we really like, but they just have like a local structure, we ask them to do a company in the States, in Delaware, a Delaware C Corp, because that's like the standard, and every other investor is going to ask for that as well. So for us, it's like really easy because there are only two structures, a Delaware C Corp or Cayman. Actually, if we see another structure, we just don't invest.
So I've been investing in various legal structures since 2012, but there's a core group. Yes, U.S. that's the most common. Singapore has also become a very common destination for a lot of Asian startups. And what I'm seeing now is Cayman is popular with a certain type of company, usually crypto, but other companies are going to Cayman from different jurisdictions also. I'm not a big fan of Cayman. Singapore, US, and India are the three structures that I'm most comfortable with and most familiar with. I've invested in over 60 companies that were Indian private limited companies. I understand how to get money in. When there's an exit, I understand how to get money out. You got to pay your taxes. So I understand a lot of those structures. I think the broader advice that I would give is if you are considering investing in different markets, figure out what is the most optimal legal structure for a particular market. And when I say that, it's a little convoluted because one of the things that I started seeing years ago was a lot of Indian startups were setting up as US C Corps, Delaware C Corps specifically. And YC actually requires international companies to flip their jurisdiction to Delaware. But what I started seeing was a lot of those companies, once they finished a program or once they really started going out and started trying to raise money, they were having trouble getting money from their local investors because there's a lot of money control rules about how much money you can send overseas and round tripping of capital and things like that. So it actually became problematic for a lot of companies in India specifically to set up a legal structure outside of the country. So one of the things that I try to do is just have a law firm who understands at least Singapore and India law and be able to work with them when a situation comes up. Otherwise, the US is kind of the default structure for companies that are targeting international markets.
There's a question from Dr. Reed here in the chat here, just talking about like the market environment, and the economic environment as well, and obviously in some places in the world also like the political environment. Has this affected has this affected the fundraising environment? How do you think about it, and how do you think about it in the future? How do you think about like the rest of like 2023 and 2024? Love to hear your thoughts. And Melissa, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So the fundraising momentum was really good and really quick last year, even as a fund manager. And I would say in probably like the last 4 months of last year, it slowed down quite a bit. Now, there's still LP interest. It's still there. That hasn't changed. It's just taking a little bit longer. It's again, there's not that sense of urgency, and that is okay. It's completely like as soon as you understand that, and embrace this new pace, you'll be okay. And that's probably like the best thing you can do for your confidence and your mental health while you're fundraising, is to keep going. Know that the investors are still there. They're just going to probably take a little bit more time to onboard. And then when it comes to portfolio companies too, like I find that, especially where I am in Canada, and if you're fundraising as a startup within Canada, exact same thing. It's taking a lot longer to fundraise, especially if you're pre-seed and you're just past and you've just started to have revenue. It's a slower pace, and while it's difficult, understand that we're all going through it. And that, I don't know, for some reason that makes me feel a lot better because we're all in this together. And so how I would conclude all of that is by saying, this is such a great, this makes me very excited, because all the companies, whether you're a fund manager or whether you're a startup, if you keep going and you survive, this economic cycle, like you're off to the races. That's my personal thesis, is that the best funds and the best startups are going to be forged during this time, because we're going to have that grit and that resilience. So this is a great time. You keep going. It might take a little bit longer, but keep going.
How do you think about the environment, Alex? What are your thoughts?
Uh, I think right now is a great time for investing. Maybe not so much for fundraising, but for investing, it's a great time. Like valuations are really reasonable. There are great entrepreneurs building awesome things, and also building a startup takes so many years, maybe 7 to 10, maybe 12 years, that you really don't know how the stock market is gonna be in the future. It's probably gonna be a different stock market than it is right now. So it's the best time for investing, and maybe for raising capital is difficult, yes, but there were a lot of new investors that wanted to invest, but in 2021 they saw valuations were really high. So right now, corporations, at least in Latin America, are starting to invest more in venture, or like medium family offices that wanted to invest right now are investing. So you just have to find the right investors, and I think it's as good as any this time for investing. And also, like in building, there like you lose a lot of tourists, and you right now have the really hardcore entrepreneurs that want to build in the long term, and I really love that.
Agree. We're getting here to the top of the hour, and the final question we always like to ask everybody here on the panel is, just knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself if you had to start building your firm from the ground up today? Pankaj, maybe we can start with you and we can just go through everybody.
Sure. I think, that's a tough one because I got so much great advice from other people around me. But I think the one piece of advice that I would give myself is don't wait. Start as soon as you can, even if you just like are thinking about it. Start the process and use the resources that are available, like VC Lab, to start that process. You may decide that you don't want to do it. That's okay, but at least start that process as quickly as possible. And make sure that you start having those conversations with people around you sooner rather than later, right?
How about you, Alex?
I would really advise someone that's starting to apply to VC Lab or to find a community of similar fund administrators. And also, what Pankaj was saying, don't wait, just start talking with LPs, start talking with entrepreneurs. This is a really long-term commitment. Like you're gonna start seeing like the fruits maybe in 15 years from now, 20 years from now. So you gotta be sure that this is really something that you want to do for the next 20, 30, or probably the rest of your life. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. You can start exploring, and if it's not for you, that's fine. There's no shame in that. But if you really want to build like an enduring venture capital firm, as soon as you start, it's better. You don't need a really big fund to start. You can start with a really small fund, and then make a great job, and then do a fund too. But yeah, you don't need a big fund to start.
Melissa?
Yeah, awesome advice. 3 things. Number 1, imposter syndrome. You're going to have it, push through anyways. Each and every one of you on this call, and that's going to be listening to this after, that are out there, you have your unique gifts that will make you an awesome fund manager, right? And then the second one is, like I said before, keep your foot on the gas, especially when it comes to the fundraising. And number 3 is that a lot of this business, once you're operationalized, you're out there, listen to your gut when you're making decisions. I wish I did that more. And so really respect your guts and your intuition as much as your analytical side as well when making decisions on who to invest and what next steps to take.
What an incredible session. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you're a limited partner in the audience, just continue to subscribe to these events. We're doing a lot of limited partner education on venture capital almost every single week. So make sure you can continue to subscribe. We'll be notifying you via email with other interesting opportunities to learn about the asset class as well. If you're a general partner and you're thinking about starting a firm, go to govclab.com. Cohort 11 is currently looking for applications. So with that being said, Alex, Pankaj, and Melissa, epic panel. Thank you so much. I learned so much from both of you, all three of you. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Enjoy
Bye.
the rest
Thank
of
you
your day.
so
All right,
much.
thanks,
Mike.
Mike.